Okay, now we're on our Philippine-China focus, and of course, for this entire week and probably another week to come, the nation will be focused on this so-called victory in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, with its, as described by many experts, sweeping, an unexpected sweeping victory for the Philippines. 14 out of 15 issues raised were awarded to the Philippines petition. So how big a victory is this? I just read the column of Carmen Pedrosa. Her title is Pyrrhic Victory. And we have heard that before from many analysts. But you mentioned Chas Freeman. Can we put Chas Freeman on screen again, and maybe you can read that quote from him, Ado?
Well,
yeah.
Chas Freeman said this is a tactical victory for the Philippines and a defeat for international law.
Strategic defeat for international law.
Strategic defeat for international law.
What does that mean, Ado?
Kasi ang purpose ng international...
No, we're English.
Okay.
Our international
The purpose of international law is peace, you know?
And understanding.
And understanding between parties, and in this case, nations. Iba yung law for individuals, iba yung law for nations. And if a decision like this is not accepted by any of the parties, and in fact, sabi ni Chas Freeman, this decision has left the issue in the condition where it can only be resolved by the use of force. Kasi nga, umalis tayo sa, where we left the bilaterals and we went into the arbitration. So now that we are here, what? It's a dead end.
Yes.
So it's only
of course, there are a few sectors calling for the Philippines to encourage Australia, Japan, and the United States to use force to enforce it.
Yun yung mga nitwits.
Yeah, these are the nitwits, as you call them.
Pea-brains.
Pea-brains.
They have small brains. And they have nothing but their hands to applaud whatever is on stage as they perceive it.
And as we read earlier in our news items, the U.S. Navy Staff Admiral is visiting China. Yeah. So why will they use force? And China is showing its capability too by showing its aircraft carrier and so on. So
the award, even the word award, is a misnomer here because there's really nothing being awarded except words. When they say that the 9-dash line does not really belong to China and they have no right to claim that, now what are we going to do with the islands that China built there? I understand 5 to 7 islands. The only way you can drive them out of there is by force, you know? So how are you going to do it? Now, regarding the extension of the economic zones, if China chooses to block, as they have started to water hose some of our fishermen who are provoking to go to that near the 12-mile limits of these specific places, they don't want them to go there for some reason, then who's going to stop that? You know?
Well, of course, the news reports in ABS-CBN, which they are very proud of, is that they sailed with some people to Scarborough, and they are being stopped by Chinese Coast Guard and other elements of the Chinese...
well, this is why Carmen Pedrosa calls it Pyrrhic. It is really just symbolic. It has really no way it could be enforced. Yun ang problema.
But I wanted to add that since May, actually, and there are headlines and news reports in all our papers at that time, in May of this year, headlining that Filipino fishermen are back in the Scarborough and there are no problems. So, the current measures being taken by the Chinese Coast Guard seems to show, or is intended to show, that it is not accepting the tribunal's results, and it is enforcing this. But I think after this show, I think it's very easy to reopen it for Filipino fishermen.
Look, when President Duterte, who was just president-elect at that time, made a very nice gesture of asking the Ambassador Xiao of China if they could allow our fishermen there. The very next day, our fishermen were there.
Precisely, yeah.
But now that the arbitral tribunal has come up with this award,
The very next day,
they're being water hosed there.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do whatever with the use of force or the use of a third party to enforce a decision. It really has to be an amicable talk, a peaceful settlement between, I would add the word, a bilateral discussion among friends. No animosities.
Yes, and
no preconditions.
what these anti-China elements and anti-dialogue elements want to portray is that if you are for dialogue, you're not nationalist, patriotic, and Filipino.
Nah. And if you're for dialogue and discussion, you're a traitor?
Yes, yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, this is now the 21st century. And these people are still living in the 14th century of...
or at the very least, at the Cold War period. Anyway, let us look at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And you did a good meme after discovering the real character and nature of the Permanent Court of Arbitration.
Yes.
First of all, it's a misnomer also to call it a court.
It is
because
not
it
a court.
Not a court.
Yeah. It is also a misnomer to call it a UN agency. It is not a UN agency. Both the United Nations and the International Court of Justice have issued disclaimers that it has nothing to do with the Hague Arbitral Tribunal.
Yes. Can we take a look, Joshua, our technical man there, at the Permanent Court of Arbitration brief on Wikipedia, because that's the simplest that we can show here. And let's take a look at number one, the first paragraph, which says the Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, is an intergovernmental organization, blah, 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 located at The Hague. It should not be confused with the International Court of Justice, which is the primary judicial branch of the United Nations. While very clear, the PCA is not a UN agency. Malinaw.
Yes.
We must make that clear because there are a lot of voices saying this is UN's decision
No.
and that must everyone must abide by, and so on. Yeah, Ado, what's your comment there?
Well, and even in the consideration of the fees and where PCA derives its income, this release shows very well that the monies involved here come from the client of the PCA. And in this case, the client is the Philippines and would have been China, sharing the cost.
That's right.
Two parties coming into an arbitration, sharing the cost for an award decision of a third party.
Yeah, Joshua, can you put in that segment on income and expenses of the PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration, and the fees and costs, so that it's very clear to our people. So, income and expenses. Since the PCA is not a UN-backed agency, its income relies on the arbitration services it provides to its clients. So, these are not litigants.
No.
These are clients.
Cliente.
Let this very clear.
Customers.
Customers. Unlike the judges from the International Court of Justice who are paid by the UN, members of the Permanent Court of Arbitration are paid from the same income the Permanent Court of Arbitration earns. So,
so it's like this. The clients pay the PCA, the PCA pays the jurors.
That's right,
So in a euphemistic sense, we paid for the decision.
The Philippines,
The Philippines. And we continued with an arbitration without the second party participating.
And the second party, of course, has since 2006 said that it excludes certain issues from arbitration.
Since 1996.
1996?
When they ratified the UNCLOS, when they fixed the... This is all about the UNCLOS. This is all about the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea. We affixed our signature in 1982. And we also we also enumerated a lot of
Exclusions.
reservations and caveats to our signature to the UNCLOS. The same thing with China. They also affix some of the reservations, and I would quote specifically here, the delimitation of the boundary of the maritime jurisdiction with the states with coast opposite or adjacent to China on the basis of international law and in accordance with the principle of equity will be effected by the Republic of China through consultations. In other words, bilateral talks direct with the other party. You see? Now,
Okay.
in 2006, and this is what you were saying, declaration made by China after the ratification,
Yes, yes.
they cleared that statement by saying that they will not accept any procedures provided for in so-so section of the convention with respect to all categories of disputes referred to in the Article 298
Yeah,
of
of,
the convention. And what is that? Those are the matters that will affect a third-party participation in any of the decision-making or in any of the conflict resolution.
So I hope we have made clear through these information that the PCA is not, number one, a UN agency.
Yes.
It is not, its results are not binding as some have been claiming. This is a one-party affair. Although we cannot say, we cannot make any moral judgments about the intentions of the jurors. The fact is, the incomes of the jurors came from one party only.
Yeah.
So these are...
This is no different from a basketball game. You know, two parties shows up, something goes wrong, there is a referee, one party walks out. What is remaining now in the basketball court is just the first party and the referee. And what the first party keeps on doing is shooting the ball and shooting the ball, and what the referee is doing is counting the shots. So that is, in a very elementary way, an analogy.
Well, in the first place, the other party did not come to the basketball court in the first place. But now we have a comment in an interview from the IC judge, International Court of Justice, the official UN court, Abdul G. Koroma. And let's listen to him if we have the clip ready from CCTV 9. Are you ready with that interview?
Arbitral tribunal, which rendered the award yesterday, that is a body which was set up under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It is not the International Court of Justice, and it is a temporary body. The Permanent Court of Arbitration, the PCA, and the International Court of Justice share the same building in The Hague, in which is called the Peace Palace. So it's not very easy for a non-lawyer to be able to make the distinction between the two bodies. The Permanent Court of Arbitration is a body which acts as the administrative body of arbitral tribunals. So states that have to exchange documents, pleadings, they use the PCA for that purpose. The PCA, of course, it has other functions. It's also responsible for investment disputes and so on and so forth. One should never lose sight of the fact that the purpose of an arbitral settlement, or it's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. That is the peaceful, the peaceful resolution of a conflict. A tribunal or a court should never lose sight of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that clarifies a lot
Yeah.
of
One
questions.
international lawyer that we have, Arnedo Valera, who is based in Washington, D.C., called me and told me that that is why precisely he was recommending that this case be taken to the International Court of Justice. But of course, I said, well, that is good for a more binding and perhaps a better, solidly based word of law. But I said, Arnedo, do you know that China is a member of the permanent representative of the UN Security Council? And that is the topmost enforcement agency of the UN. And so is Russia. Do you think even the decision of the ICJ will matter for enforcement purposes when it's brought to the UN Security Council? Of course, the Great Britain, France, and the United States will vote for it, but with just one veto from either Russia or China, this has no future. So why are we wasting the time? This is my problem here, Kamentong, no? Why are we wasting the time of 30 million of our people? I keep on appealing about this. 30 million of our people are below poverty line. Why are we wasting their time
In other words,
with this very expensive exercise,
Yeah, by the
which
way-
I heard came up to about 400 million US dollars, which is an equivalent of 18 billion pesos.
Well,
Correct me if I'm wrong, no? But if this is what I'm hearing,
Yes, yes.
it is a tremendous waste of taxpayers' money for something. You start with bilateral, you're going to an arbitration that costs so much, and then you would again just go back
To dialogue.
to dialogue after furling feathers and destroying good relationships and maybe interrupting friendships in between. What was Noynoy Aquino and Albert Del Rosario thinking about when they did this? Were they thinking that this money? Were they thinking this was their time? Were they thinking this was for their interest? Or were they just following the dictates of another foreign country?
Well, I think it is
You
very
see?
clear that the connection to the Asia pivot or pivot
Yeah. Remember,
exists.
the lawyer here of the Philippine panel was even an American.
Yeah,
Wala naman
Reichler.
silang delikadesa
Reichler
dyan.
or Rickler. Yeah.
Reichler.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these people are just, you know, I hope to be able to see a legal loophole here so I can run against these people and recover part of the taxpayers' money.
Well, the word is that this money was not part of the GAA, so it must have come from Malampaya. You know? So
Yeah.
again, that's illegal because Malampaya Fund is for energy projects.
For energy project or the disbursement acceleration
DAP,
program, which
DAP.
which Carpio himself said was unconstitutional.
Well, we have run out of time. There's so much still to discuss about this, but I think we've made the point very clear. The character of PCA in this case is not as many people try to interpret it, and that in the end, after all this hullabaloo and all the expenses, even Carpio is saying in closed circles, we have to go to dialogue, otherwise nothing will happen from this case anyway.
Of course.
So your message to our international public, Ado?
Again, back to my book. We have a government, or at least a past government, that has a problem for every solution. This is our problem here in the Philippines. And I hope you wouldn't mind us following the chair every now and then, and you will still come to our aid when it's time to call for assistance. But this is really a learning on our behalf, done by former leaders of this country, where they raise our expectations so much only to push us with our face falling on the ground. We are very confident and hopeful that with the new president, immediately even before assuming office, declaring and announcing that he will go into diplomacy, apply bilateral talks, we know that the future of this country in just a matter of months and maybe the next few years will be in the right track towards prosperity and a better life for our people.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Paglinawan, and thank you all, and see you again next week for our next journey around the world and in Asia.